the things that were just raised, though a lot of these issues are obviously very interconnected.
I should say
Time
that
out.
also for
Go
the
ahead.
panel, do repeat questions because they can't hear on the internet.
Okay, we'll try to do that. Also, Greg did give me permission to make one public service announcement. So we can transition for a moment. Simply want to tell you about an event in a few weeks, mid-October during Free Speech Week here on campus. I'm co-sponsoring an event with a professor in the communications school, which will feature Brian Amerige, which is a name probably many of you know, formerly of Facebook, now with Thoughtful. He will be speaking along with an attorney from FIRE, that's the group for individual rights in expression. They will be speaking on free speech in the digital era. That'll be October 19th, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll try to get some word out to people closer to it, but I just thought I'd give you a heads up about that. I'm sorry? It'll be in the communications school. We don't have the exact room yet, but it'll be in a different, it will not be in this building. Okay, thanks. Back to the Fountainhead. So many fun things to pick up on here. I've been asked to kind of lead the panel a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Rourke's calm. I mean, the beginning of the book, he's left, right? The man's just been expelled from school, right? And he's calm, right?
Yeah.
Even think about him, again, in relationship with Dominique. You'd be like throttling. I mean, you could imagine somebody who's arguing with her a lot, wrestling with her, like, don't you see? And yet he seems very patient. I don't want to say too much, just some thoughts about what you think might be and whether it has anything to do with his independence or his egoism or other characteristics that allow him to have the attitude that he does toward his work, you know, need for clients, etc.
Well, one of the things I cut from the talk is that in addition to people thinking that Ayn Rand is endorsing the kind of stoic attitude that Dominique has, some people think Rourke is a stoic for this very reason. Mm-hmm. They think that because he's calm, he's not like emotionally expressive that much with people when he speaks, that just nothing bothers him. He's got guards up, and I don't think that's right for the reasons that I stated. But
I actually don't think he has his guard up. I think so. I mean, I think part of it to go. I'll let you finish your.
Just one more thought, which is that there is something though to the last point that I made about how the reason the pain only goes down to a certain point is because of these values of character that he's achieved. And that sort of looks like somebody who is immune to the vicissitudes of the world. But in fact, he wouldn't have been able to do it if he hadn't been making himself vulnerable in the first place, going out and actually getting the practice of achieving these values.
Yeah. So I think that's right, and I think that's a big part of it. And I think Rourke is a particular instantiation of these abstract principles in a particular fictionalized person. And I think partly you can see the difference. So if you've read Atlas Shrugged and you consult the kind of variety of characters, because in The Fountainhead, he's the one kind of morally perfect person, right? But if you look at in Atlas Shrugged, Francisco's not calm.
Yeah.
And it's not for any flaw of character in him. He's, nobody would describe him as like, oh, he has so much equanimity, he's cool as a cucumber.
The same with number of other positive, smaller characters.
Yeah, who
like
are
Mike.
Bouncy and excited,
Right.
or who are kind of, a little bit like bulldogish, right? And I mean Mike in The Fountainhead, for that matter, who, as far as I think he's not flawed in any particular way that we can see, right? And he gets really hot-headed. Austin Heller,
I sure do.
Well,
as do I on his
characters.
behalf, right? So I think that there are aspects, again, we don't want to read into Rourke this kind of literal archetype of, okay, this is what it looks like to have self-esteem and to be, resilient and psychologically healthy. This is what it looks like for this man whom Rand created in order, to enjoy the experience of such a person.
I think that's important, that it's not like, okay, so calmness, that's one of the features now you all have to go out there and the drill sergeant is telling you to do it.
Yeah.
But it does seem to me like it's for his self-esteem. He is not fundamentally threatened by what's going on, by the decisions other people make, by all the stupid would-be clients who don't recognize the value of his work, even by Dominique, it's like, yes, obviously it hurts. He wants to be with her and everything. He wants her to understand better, but he realizes she has got to understand for herself. Like, she's got to be independent and come to this rather than him rushing her into it or something like that. And I think he's kind of fundamentally at peace. And right, in his particular case,
Yeah, and I think, I mean, he has a quiet passion that people who actually see him see, right? Remember the Austin Heller quote about the Indian torture and exile? Like, he doesn't see a calm,
right, that's no
equilibrium. He sees, Rourke's fiery, passionate gaze at his work and his willingness to walk over corpses, right? Even Keating can see that in Rourke, and Keating, doesn't always see very much, but he sees that. And so I think there are elements of each of these things. I think there's a reason that Rand chose that temperament, I think, as the kind of manifestation of this, this set of values, because I think it really puts into stark relief the perspective you're talking about, on which he understands why, in the grand scheme of his life, this too is not only okay but necessary, right? Like, when it comes, he actually, he means it when he says, no, I'm done with Stanton. Yeah, please just expel me. Can we just be done with this conversation? I've learned what I needed to learn here. So he's actually not upset, not because, he's kind of guarded and doesn't let himself feel the pain, but because there's nothing left for him at Stanton. So in that case, he sees what is unfathomable to the dean, which is like, this institution has served its purpose for me.
And it served its purpose for me. And I think this goes back to something you were speaking about a little bit earlier in your talk. But, you spoke of he sets his own standards. He has his own goals. He knows what he wants. And okay, he got what he needed to learn out of it, this schooling from it. But and that also just seems that he's got his own ends. He's the first-hander in that sense, in choosing his own values, and then can see things in terms of, look, she's not going to be valuable to me if prematurely pretending to understand things that she doesn't. And
that's just going to exactly kind of hurt both of us. And also, we see how not easy it is for him in contexts where he actually does face a great loss. So the Manhattan Bank building scene, so I've been re-listening in anticipation of this event, and so I'm fresher on certain scenes than others, because I'm kind of in the middle. But the Manhattan Bank building, I mean, the way she describes his outfit, it's interesting. She has this clinging the table thing, but which we also see with Francisco, speaking of him, right? Like, when he's just been punched by Reardon and has to keep his cool, which is not an easy cool, right? And Rourke, I mean, and there are moments where he had to let a few seconds pass to trust himself to speak. That's not cool and collected, right? Like, he's feeling really powerful emotion there. So, I think there's more than meets the eye, and I think, it's a kind of mix, but there's no stoicism there, is what I really want to bear down on, as Ben was saying.
Do you see, Gena in particular, in terms of your work with entrepreneurs and builders and so on, do you see some similar qualities in what allows some of them to be as resilient in facing the rejection that they do? I don't know if you want to draw it. I mean, you made reference to this, at least broadly, in your opening.
Definitely. Yeah, and I mean, and I do think we see that resilience gets built over time. And with Rourke, he kind of comes out, we meet him when he's basically already got it, right? And there are still things he needs to learn, as Ben was saying, right? There's knowledge that he needs to kind of accumulate and deepen understanding about, like, what motivates these people. But he's basically already built the level of that self-esteem, that profound conviction that ultimately his ideal can be achieved by the time he's this 19-year-old kid, and we meet him at his expulsion. That's rare, as I was saying, and what we don't see, because it's just not the focus of the novel, is how he got there and the experience. I mean, he's been working in the building trades since he was a young boy, right? He hasn't just been sitting in classes, listening to lectures and writing papers that have 5 paragraphs in them, to get an A in class. Like, he's been out there living, and presumably experiencing the hard knocks, and getting hurt and having to learn how to sort of exercise self-discipline in the face of competing or kind of short-term, disappointments. And so I get to see that a lot of that with founders as they fail a few times and as they gain the perspective, partly of talking to other founders or kind of reading the stories of others who it almost never is their first venture the successful one that we hear about, and you can just see this again and again, and to kind of gain the perspective of, a career entrepreneur is someone who has tried this in a lot of different contexts and iterated and failed and made mistakes, and that's part of the learning process. And like they form a conception of what it means to kind of build and to be entrepreneurial that's wider than any one outcome or kind of any one particular setback, and they're able to contextualize the things that are happening to them within that in a broader perspective. And they have enough of their own judgment about what they're building and why it's good, or kind of why it's worth betting on, that they can take a lot of the no's, a lot of the rejection, a lot of the hits from investors, et cetera, and that doesn't make a dent in whatever it is they see about their product. It may be disappointing, like, what? I thought this guy would see it and he didn't, or it may actually lead them to self-reflect, or maybe I missed something, but there's not this fundamentally second-handed like reliance on the investors or on the customers to see reality for them. Is that along the lines?
Let me come back to Dominique a little bit, and we will open this up for questions from you guys in a few minutes. She's such a hard to understand character, and you were speaking about her a little bit. You took her on somewhat.
Protective of her.
No, I mean, you love her and you hate her and you're exasperated by it. Just like, motivation by fear. Do you think it would be fair to characterize Dominique as,
I think it stands out pretty.
yeah, I mean,
As
do you
opposed
think that's
to motivation by love?
Yeah,
Yeah, a huge element of that. And it's the element of that whole kind of worldview I was describing, where you're worried more about loss than about what you're trying to gain. And I just have an affirmative answer, yes. So
Yeah.
you want to elaborate?
Yes, I agree. I think there's just one kind of aspect that I would add to the picture, Ben, that you already painted, is that she has a specific premise. She has a conviction about kind of the power of bad people, right? Like that bad people, the irrational people run the world, that they're the ones who ultimately decide what happens to the buildings that you build and to the lovers you take on, right? And so any values that you put out into the world, you now subject to the kind of ugly destruction that all these people who are irrational and bad and run the world, that they're going to now inflict upon it. And she thinks they're important, right? Like she thinks they have causal potency in determining how a life goes.
Mm-hmm. Where you see this really come out is toward the end. She's married to Wynand,
Yep.
and they go to the theater one evening, and it's some modernistic absurdist drama, and they have a conversation about how you realize that the people we're up against, you realize that the people who I thought were going to destroy the greatest values in the world are many and smutty and small. And so this is a presaging of Ayn Rand's view of the impotence of evil, and that part of what it takes to overcome the malevolent universe premise that she's got, and which leads to this motivation by fear, is this better metaphysical view of the world, that actually evil only has power when good people give it to them.
But how does she realize that? She realizes that because she now understands Wynand.
Yes, she sees that he's been giving it to them.
It wasn't the Keatings, it wasn't the Kiki Holcombs.
Exactly.
They're impotent except through Wynand's, the power he
Right.
gave them. So
And
it
he
was
gave
this
the same
great
kind of power.
mistaken
The
man.
idea of the
Yeah.
yacht is
Yeah.
I've got to defy the world as if the world,
Yeah.
no, you don't have to defy the world.
And it wasn't that different a mistake. Like his mistake, the form it took was much more lethal, right? Like it actually caused a lot more destruction. And in that way, I think he's sort of less redeemable existentially than she is, because he's like caused multiple people's deaths, right?
And Winan himself
destruction.
starts to see it at the very, very end,
Yeah.
after he's already met his tragic,
Yeah.
and when he realizes, I've got to just shut down the banner and
Right.
stop letting
It's too late.
Tui
Yeah.
work for me.
Yeah, but what allows Dominique to change her mind, and I just love, because again, I sort of figured it out with her, because I also very much, as a 16-year-old reading The Fountainhead, I felt like everyone around me and everyone who decides if I get into college or what kind of class or what kind of activity I get to do or what's even within my reach, like they're all a bunch of posers and phonies, and they are the ones who control my life, and either I have to pander to them or I never get to do anything, and it's not going to be in my control. And then I see and so I'm with her on the worries about, the way I saw it was I'm Dominique without the self-control, like without the self-discipline to actually carry out all of these, very intentional acts of kind of self-destruction. But what I learned with her was, none of them matter. It's Winan who did all of this, and Winan is one of us. Like, Winan is one of us who messed up. He went very wrong. But, it's to the extent of someone's independence, ambition, genuine kind of value orientation that anything happens in this world.
Let me just add, I was glad to hear you both immediately, oh yeah, definitely motivation by fear. I've raised this with some other objectivists, and there's a reluctance I've often encountered too. And I think what it comes from is thinking something like this. Dominique is one of the good guys in the end. She's one of us. So we're not supposed to say anything or think anything bad about. No, but I really think this is operating some, and motivation by fear.
not
Ooh, that's a,
supposed to,
that's a
real
bad
character.
thing. That's a mistaken thing, and so on. So I
funny.
don't know. I want to make that
There's-
sort of meta observation about the way we take these things sometimes.
There's all kinds of positive characters in her books who are mixed and have
Well,
flaws
right. I
and
mean, that's
are
part of what you were
developing.
bringing. I mean, these people are complicated. So I think even with the question earlier, well, she's a second-hand. Well, she's not just a simple second. I mean, at the least, she's not a simple, straightforward
not an
second. Right. I mean,
epistemic second-hand,
they're
certainly,
complex character, and just like us. Ever meet a person a little complicated? Got well, he's got a certain degree of this and a certain degree of that, and Tara's okay in this respect, but man, she's got these or whatever. Anyway. I do have a few more issues, but just to mix it up a little bit, let's take a few from you guys. Yeah.
Doesn't Gail also have motivation by fear?
Yeah.
Big time. Again, Dominique and Gail are very similar, except that they take very different approaches to coping with what they see as this malevolent universe, I think.
Yes.
You mentioned at Ben Figler, you talked about how Rorik is not concerned, or he's not as concerned with how people think of him and what people think in general, in the way that Dominique and Winan are. But I wanted to see if you three could elaborate on to what extent or in what ways he is concerned with what people think and how he feels about that. Because if you compare Rorik to, say, the musician in Atlas Shrugged, who is motivated in part to quit because of how people love his music in the wrong way. But Rorik doesn't seem to care what people think of his buildings, even the people who live in them and use them. So I was hoping you could elaborate on that.
I should repeat the question. So basically, it's although there are differences, we've said, in the way that Rourke views the importance of the attitudes of other people and some of the other characters. How does Rourke, or to what extent does he genuinely care about what other people think and do? And
Yeah. No,
if we could elaborate on that.
really glad you asked. Do you have a burning? Okay, I'll just jump in. No, I'm really glad you asked, because there are really important ways, and I've seen this mistake oftentimes. Like, well, to be like Rourke, again, kind of one of these, second-handed interpretations of Rourke that then leads you to, like, imitate him instead of actually developing your own independent judgment, is like, well, he doesn't care what anyone thinks, so I don't care if no one ever uses my product. I don't care if everyone else thinks that I'm a jerk. Like, I'm independent. Like, there are all sorts of ways that he cares about other people and what they think, right? And so, for one thing, one of the major differences between his perspective and Dominique's is he believes fundamentally he believes he will find his kind of clients. If he didn't believe that, like just take out that one conviction, he would not have any of the sort of confidence all the way down that he can be an architect. Because you literally can't be an architect without clients. You can't do it, right? And he says, I don't build to have clients. I have clients in order to build. But like, he needs the clients. And that's on a kind of instrumental level. Like, he needs to believe that there are people out there, and he needs to find those people. You know, and I was having a debate with my husband, Matt, the other day about like, how different would it be if he were living in the age of the internet? Like, couldn't he much more quickly network online and find his, like the Henry Cameron fan, you know, forum or whatever, like just like go find the people. And Matt doesn't think it would actually make a difference, which is interesting. We could debate that separately. But the fact is, like, he's waiting for his kind of people to come in, and his main source of, you know, advertisement are his buildings, right? But if you kind of take that into another kind of field or another context where like you're building a software program, or you're writing is largely about communication, right? About making something objective to other people. And so if you're a writer who doesn't care about the audience, about the people you're writing for, you should reconsider your line of work, because why are you writing? For whom, for what, right? Like, and how do you expect to then get remunerated for your work if you're not actually thinking about the context of the people you're writing for, right? So there's the instrumental. Sorry. Good. I know I've been on for too long, but the one last point that I think is important is there's the spiritual way that he really cares. It matters to him to find the Stephen Mallory, the Dominique, the Winand. Like we were saying, you know, the ways he guns for Winand to not basically, you know, to not self-destruct, like the ways that he values his friends is really, the scenes with Cameron where he, like, you know, he goes to his home and just sits with him while Cameron is dying, and what it means to Rourke, like spiritually, he derives profound value from that visibility and
from what they think.
And from
too.
what they think and from
Think
what
about,
they see.
Think
Yeah.
about his relationship with Dominique. It matters a great deal what reason she has for being in a relationship with him.
Yeah.
You know, she says, what if you quit your job completely and we just live only for each other? He says, then I wouldn't want to be with you. I want you to be with me because you've abandoned this crazy view of the world that you have, and that you're here for the right reasons. So
He cares about what they think, but not what you think about me, because, you know.
right.
What he's not doing is using other people's thinking as a substitute for his own.
Right.
That's the key differentiation, right? And like, are you trying to borrow other people's convictions and judgments as a substitute for forming your own?
And I think coming back to, he understands the power of the good, because it's not like when he wants clients, he wants people to get his work, but it's not like they're great numbers, or they're going to be great numbers anytime soon. And even with Cameron, we get, well, there was this one great guy in recent years, you know, but the power of that one great guy, or the power of the client who can, it's like, okay, I can keep going for a while until I can get more and more. But that comes from understanding that the power isn't in the numbers, it's in the values.
Quality
And his
of
whole
play.
orientation is so about
I just
the
need a
way
few
I want
clients.
my life
Yeah.
to go, and so on, yeah.
Yeah. A few of the right kind of client.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Question, you talked about the builder mentality. So Gail Wyman clearly has some aspects of it. He's been amazingly successful in building this newspaper empire. Of course, it ultimately is destroyed by a fatal flaw in it. Can you talk about the differences between
Yeah.
Rourke as a builder and Wyman as a builder?
Yeah. So,
So again, let me repeat
yes,
the
please,
question.
please.
On this idea of builders, Winand in certain respects seems a builder, but ultimately fails. Could Gena address the different ways in which Rourke is a builder and Winand is a builder?
Yeah, so I think Ben addressed this really nicely in part in his talk, which is that a builder is focused on creating value by his own standards of the good, and then exchanging value with other builders to the extent of their mutual, to the extent that it is win-win, to the extent that both are kind of selfishly, seeing the value of the exchange. Winand is basing every decision about the newspaper he's building and what to publish and what to invest in not around his judgment of like, what is good writing? What is a good, message to put out there? Or what is good art? Right? Like he's basing it on what's going to allow me to control and influence people the most. Like what is going to get the most, think of it as like clickbait, right? Like he's, trying to manipulate people's public opinion and impressions so that they kind of flock to his paper. And so his standards are not his own as far as what actually drives his decisions day to day, minute to minute. And so when you actually hear about the things Winans doing before meeting him, like a lot of it is just awful and nonsensical, both in terms of the sort of drivel that fills his papers and in terms of like the ways that he just kind of messes with people in order to kind of just get a sensational story out of it. Or he like pretended to crash his plane in a state where there happened to be a bunch of photographers ready to, take his photo. And then that of course ended up all over the Winan paper. Like he's a sensationalist. He's, he's not living the life of someone with high standards who's, putting something good into the world. I think he's doing that from a place of, again, this mistaken premise, and he's capable of much more, but what he's building is not by his own view of the good. Does that make sense? Is that a helpful clarifier?
Over here, Kristen.
The quarry scene. So it strikes me as sort of a highly stylized view of what an independent person would do.
Are we talking about the quarry scene or the sex scene?
Not the sex scene. The
Okay,
actual
just
sex
literally.
We'll get
the
there
quarry
later
scene.
with the relationship.
We'll get there.
scene. Yes.
Just checking.
And I just was curious, how would you hold that as an ethical example? Is it too extreme for people to live that way, in order to be independent in their own lives, or how would you expect
Are
a
you-
person to?
Are you talking about the love at first sight aspect of it?
No, the
Just like that he's
giving up
working.
everything
Oh.
It's hard labor.
Quarry when his business, when he doesn't have any clients, it's like a stylized moment of his own independence and
Well, what's
commitment to his own career.
stark about it to you?
Just that it's, manual labor. It's not directly connected to his work as an architect.
I mean, it would be stark if I had to work in a quarry, but it'd be really stark. But
Sweeping the philosophy room.
I mean, for Rourke, it's a little bit ordinary. He's been working in the building trades his whole life, all the way up through college. I don't think for a moment he even regards it as a contemptible. Mike Mulligan thinks it would be for him, but he's dismissive of that and says, "I've been working in the building trades all my life." So this is his way of, like if I had the same thing, I would get a job at a law firm, as a secretary, and that would be my quarry. But it wouldn't.
Really? That's what?
Yeah.
Like in a coffee shop, or like, and we see a lot. Part of it is like he has this very particular. He is at this point in his career. He's worked at Francone's still at that time Francone and Hires firm, and just like been disgusted by the ways that they're trying to butcher his like structural design with all their classical crap, and he doesn't want to have to deal with it anymore, right? And that's not even like, it's not necessarily even for him a matter of moral principle. It's like, it's a distaste. Like he doesn't want to have to work in another office like that. He wants to get as far away from it as possible. He knows one way or another that's not what he wants to be doing. It's no closer to the thing to the actual work, which is designing buildings his way. He knows the only thing right now to do to get to that work is wait for someone to see his buildings and reach out to him. And what he wants to do in the meantime is physical. He wants to feel the kind of pure efficacy of breaking granite. He actually really likes that,
Yeah.
and there are ways it fulfills him.
So this is another issue of the point you raised before about a particularization of an
Exactly.
ideal.
Wouldn't be
that
the right thing
this
for
is-
most of us
Yeah.
most of the time, but I think it makes total sense for him in that context, at that point in his life.
Which is a aspect of her literature that Tora Beckman has a great chapter on in The Fountainhead, on the metaphysics of values in The Fountainhead.
So thank you, Tora.
Yes.
When I'm looking at Ellsworth, Toohey, and also, Gail Wyman, I look at them as moral subjective of two different types, where Wyman is trying to, he's separating the moral from the practical, but in his mind, the moral, the values are those of other people, his audience, the lowest common denominator. And the practical for him is power, not any real achievement of value. And then he is also subjective, but he's trying to impose his subjective values on people at large. Is that a good way to frame, try to put a bigger picture on subjectivism as a, in fact, maybe Tara can answer, she's a book on viable values comes to mind when thinking about this.
So first I should repeat the question. Basically, it's asking for some comparison between Wynand and the subjectivism that's at work in his approach and Toohey and the subjectivism that might be at work in his approach. I should say, I think later this afternoon we have a whole talk on Toohey, which, from Jason, I believe, and the evil, and I guess I want to say two things. I think we should leave this primarily to after that session to the question period. I'm sorry? No, we go till 2:20, I believe.
Oh.
We have some more time. The other thing, just I would say quickly, and this isn't full answer, but I think Toohey's in a class by himself in the book. He's certainly not along the kind of spectrum of these people who are struggling with their independence, as we saw with, Dominique and Wynand, and even though you didn't focus on him, Keating and so on, right? And, a question had arisen earlier at one point about Rourke and how kind he is to Wynand in a way, in the end, and in a similar way, he's very forgiving, you might say, of Keating. I don't think he'd ever be that way with Toohey. I mean, but again, Toohey raises just a whole other dimension that I think we should leave probably to let Jason figure out.
Difficult.
So more questions, and again, we're trying to think about independence and egoism here, to the extent we can. Yes?
Fair to characterize Rourke's independence not as creating or forming his beliefs, but as validating or maybe reinforcing them based on others' thoughts?
I'm not quite sure I got that. So before, I don't know.
Whenever he forms an opinion or a value for himself, he justifies it based off of his own ideals or his own beliefs. But then in reality, you need customers for your business, so in a way it reinforces the belief. So
Okay.
is that a fair way to characterize it?
So first I have to characterize, I have to repeat the question, sorry, for the tape. The question is basically about Rourke as, on the one hand, seemingly generating his own standards or values, but on the other hand, needing, if not confirmation, he's got to see how this is actually playing out with clients or customers in the world and so on. So how exactly does that work, I guess, is, yeah. So I'll just say something to respond to begin with. This seems to me in a way related to one of the questions that I think came up after Gena's talk about, he says he sets his own standards, Rourke, right? But I think in part of what you were responding to a question about that is, it can't be oblivious to the world around you or to what it is you're trying to do. So even in terms of thinking of clients, he's thinking of when he builds the homes that are going to be more for low budget people and so on. But he's thinking about the realities of their life and wanting some privacy and what's going to make this more convenient, and not just convenient, but more actually enjoyable. So he's in the real world. So it's not like those first generations of values, like when I first formed my own opinions, it's science fiction or something like, right? He's living, he's observing all the time, and he's drawing evidence for what might then feed into his, I think these things are really important in building this kind of home or this kind of office building or whatever it might be. Yeah. But I think and again, this goes back to some other things that the other speakers have been saying. I think there's a constant interplay, there's got to be in a reality-oriented life of, Well, I'm getting, I really thought this lecture was going to be great that I gave my class the other day. And, I was getting some evidence from them. I was getting evidence from them that it wasn't going over so clearly and so on. Well, I got to pay attention to that evidence as opposed to, well, I had my ideas. I'm a first-hander. Like, I'm first-handed in the world and paying attention to things. But, I mean, we've all got to be sensitive to that and also sensitive to, well, wait a minute. Now I'm getting too bothered by just this person's reaction or the funny look on his face. Let me, think this all through more fully.
One reason it's
Yeah, go ahead.
important to think about what the meaning of independence is, at least for Ayn Rand. It's primarily that you need to be an independent thinker as opposed to going along with the flow of how other people think. It's not you need to be an independent thinker independent of reality. The whole reason, and here I mean like metaphysical reality, not social reality. The whole reason independence is important is because we are human beings who survive by the use of our minds and need to figure things out in the world. We need to discover causal connections in order to build tools that help us live. And if we tether our thinking to groupthink, we won't do that. We won't be able to figure out what's actually true. That's why I put it in terms of the question is, what's true and what's good? But it's true about reality. And so you've got to be validating your various standards as well. Now that's not portrayed in the book. Like you don't see where he gets all his standards from, and that's just because there needs to be selectivity in what's presented. But you do see him, or at least you don't see him validating all of his standards. You see him validating some, and that's what the whole debate in his mind about the principle behind the Dean is about. He's trying to validate an ethical standard, the standard itself of independence, why it's good.
Can I just, as one last maybe concretization, just offer an example of how this distinction manifests in a field like mine, psychology, which is all about people, right? So like my field of inquiry is, how do people think? What allows people to change their habits and their mindsets? What motivates people? So my data, the reality that I need to be always looking at and in a constant feedback loop with is largely just the reality of other people, right? Like I have to observe them and see what they do when different contexts arise and how quickly or slowly do they change or take up different treatment strategies that we present to them. It's all about trying to understand people. And there are two very different ways I could be approaching that task. And I've been tempted down both like I've experienced both of these approaches. One, okay, so I think cognitive behavioral therapy is this really promising treatment. I think that because of a combination of, I've read studies where I can kind of see how they checked, for the effectiveness of this treatment versus a bunch of other ones. And this treatment allowed people to change their thinking. And I already think that's a big part of what then motivates people's behavior. And that makes sense to me. And I've also tried it out and seen how people are really engaged with it and they get better and they have a sense of agency. But then for some reason it didn't really work for this person or that one. And so, I don't know, maybe I need to check my assumptions about CBT being this universal cure-all because it didn't work for, people who also have the substance abuse or whatever. Versus everyone in my field is in love with CBT. It's much easier to get published if I'm pro CBT. I'm seeing some of these problems, but I'm just gonna not think too hard about that because I don't know how to even, it would be so complicated to try to even explain what's wrong and to try to, what would I do instead? I don't know. Do I have to just make up a new treatment? That's really hard. So what? Everyone already does CBT. I'm just gonna go ahead and champion CBT. Two very different approaches, where the first one is an independent thinking approach and the second one is a second-handed approach. I hope that helps.
Let's take one more for now.
I wanted to ask if you can highlight parts of the story that might explain how Rorik is so certain that he's on the right path, as opposed to being a martyr for good architecture. There's a scene very early on in the book where he's meeting his hero for the first time, who is a much older, experienced architect who is broken down, and he's unperturbed by this. And if I remember, he's even reassuring towards him. So what explains this about the character, and specifically, like, what's in the story that actually helps us understand that?
So again, the question has to do with Rourke's motivation
And certainty.
and certainty, and how is it that he can be so certain? I'll leave it.
Yeah, and so okay, kind of emotionally resilient in the face of obstacles. Because part of what you're describing is so like Cameron seems to see what Rourke sees. It's not like Cameron isn't as first-handed as him or doesn't have the same. Like Cameron, if anything, he's a master of these standards, and like he taught Rourke a lot of what Rourke now appreciates. Speaking of, you can also learn from other people and be first, right? And Cameron is emotionally kind of a wreck, right? Like when Rourke meets him, and it does seem like there's this difference in their like attitudes and approach and just like how they experience the pain. And I think a lot of that doesn't necessarily, so I think there's a mix of like, do they have different levels of certainty in what? Like, I don't think they have different levels of certainty in this is good architecture, this is crappy derivative architecture. I think they have the same level of conviction. If anything, Cameron knows more and has seen more, right? Do they have the same understanding and sort of perspective on the journey of being an innovator in a context where people are going to oppose you and where there's a lot of, really bad and kind of like rigid, thinking and judgment, and where the market is really against you, so to speak. Like, I think there's a perspective Rourke has that we've talked about indirectly, like of he is able to kind of see the long road, and he has this deep kind of emphasis on the vision of the good. And everything else is like on a lower par of reality for him, right? And we see this in multiple.
And I think it's the vision of what I want.
Yeah.
This is what I want. That's why I'm not a martyr for this.
Yeah.
Like, that's why when I give up the Manhattan Bank building, it's like, no, this is selfish. So I'm not sacrificing myself to something more than this is what I want. So the vision is, again, his value.
Also, I took part of your question to be, how is he certain, not just about that this is good, but that he's going to succeed? Were you asking about that too?
So certain that this is good for him.
Yeah.
Because it seems
So
that it very well may not.
yeah, so part of it's being good for him is his succeeding. And he's getting evidence all along through the story that there are people out there who like this work. His first job is working for Franken and Hire. The client comes in and is asking for these things, and the not Franken but the Snite firm, and Snite doesn't want to give it to him, and so he says, "Oh, do you really want it like this?" And he tears apart the nice Japanese drawing, and yes, that's what I want. And so this is his first client, and he gets the gas station and the grocery store, and they're small projects, right? But there's signs that there's a demand for this even among people who aren't architecturally sophisticated, and there's a steady flow throughout the book, and he dries up at certain periods, but he knows it's there.
So I want to, sorry, if it's really quick.
I'm going to try and make it really quick. There's
You're
one.
going to make it really quick.
I'm going to make it really quick, or you cut me off. There's a quote that's relevant here, which made me cry when I was just re-listening to it, so it's fresh, where Cameron tells Rourke, here's what you're up for, and asks him, like, do you want it? Is this really what you want? And Rourke doesn't say, no, it's going to be better for me. He says, if I can sit where you're sitting today, at the end of my life, I will have a greater gift than I could ever possibly repay. I mean, but much better than that. So I think that's relevant. Like, it's not that he thinks things will go differently. It's how he understands what's good for him. Okay.
And in a way, that's a nice feed to the final thing I want to bring up, which is not a response. This is a new question now I'm posing to you guys. So let's coming back to Rourke, to end on a positive value.
Yes.
Okay. And the spirit of youth, which we haven't really talked about today, but it's a spirit that a lot of people take from the Fountainhead, and I think with good reason. Ways in which you see Rourke's independence or his egoism feeding the spirit of youth that you think the book, evinces. Or, I mean, I have a, if that's too
Well,
broad
I
a thing.
wrote a whole
That's
chapter
true.
on
Glenn has a
the
great
subject
chapter
in the Documenting U essays on the Fountainhead, but
Read
it
Glenn's
comes up
chapter.
because of the 1968 introduction, where she says that the book is a confirmation of the spirit of youth, and she puts it there because she sees so many people who start out with an idealistic attitude and serious about ideas when they're young, selling out and burning out and compromising and giving up. And she sees Rourke as kind of the embodiment of the person who doesn't, who proceeds with and completes the path, the vision that he starts with at the beginning of his life. And the various characters in the novel see that about him. Like Mallory says, you could imagine him living forever because he hasn't changed in a fundamental way.
But just to make a quick connection, which was why I was linking it with what you were saying, it's like, if I could be what you are, Cameron, at the end of my life, I will not have given up my vision, right? And I think in a sense, that is the spirit of it, right? You don't give up your vision no matter what. And that too, we have this line from Mallory about, you could imagine, like, it's as if he's achieved immortality. Yeah. It's not that he's not older next year than he was last year, but he's achieved immortality. How so? I mean, do you guys have thoughts on that? Again, I have more I could say on that. So, spirit of youth and/or this immortality idea.
That's so interesting. I mean, he doesn't think of himself as immortal, right? Like, which I think is relevant.
But
no, I understand. But Mallory says it of him,
right?
And
but it seems, I think, as a reader, it's like there's something
ageless and timeless about him. No,
and there's back and forth in Keating's mind, because at one point Keating says, "You're so old and serious, Howard," but then later when Keating realizes how much he was wrong about it, he says, "No, I'm the old and stodgy one. You're serious about your youth."
Yeah. Should we end on a Bob Dylan quote for Greg's sake?
Forever
I
young.
was older then, I'm younger now.
Sorry. No, but I think what keeps him young, so to speak, and what keeps anybody young in the admirable sense is he sticks to his values. It's his independence and it's his integrity, I think, over the book. It's like, he wasn't giving away his days. He wasn't chipping away. He didn't say, yeah, this is going to be too hard to have a career where they reject me like Cameron and so on. This is what I want. I'm going to goddamn go after it. My days are investments. They're growing my life. So yeah, I'm getting older, but I'm getting richer, right? As opposed to, well, they're dribblings away of squanderings. And
yeah, I
so
think there's a way you can feel
is
more vital as you get on in life, to the extent that you really internalize this spirit and really live and fully live and figure out, like, how do I really fully live? What do I really want my life to be? And really, really go after it. And I think people experience this. Like, I feel younger now than I did a decade ago. So I think there's really something to that.
So I think we're about out of time. Okay. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.